I awoke next morning with the music of the horn in my ears, and leaping out of the ancient bed, went to a curtained window where the sunlight filtered through little deep-set panes. The horn ceased as I looked into the court below. A man who might have been brother to the two falconers of the night before stood in the midst of a pack of hounds. A curved horn was strapped over his back, and in his hand he held a long-lashed whip. The dogs whined and yelped, dancing around him in anticipation. There was the stamp of horses, too, in the walled yard. "Mount!" cried a voice in Breton, and with a clatter of hoofs, the two falconers, with falcons on their wrists, rode into the courtyard among the hounds. Then I heard another voice, which sent the blood throbbing through my heart. "Peru, Louis, hunt the hounds well, and spare neither spur nor whip. Though Raoul and thou, Gaston, see that the épervier does not prove himself naïve. And, if it be in your best judgment, fais courtesy à la soeur, garder un oseille, like the moor there on Hester's waist, is not difficult. But thou, Raoul, mayest not find it so simple to govern that haggard. Twice last week he foamed au vif and lost the Picard, though he is used to the lure. The bird acts like a stupid branchier. Pas un haggard n'est pas si facile." Was I dreaming? The old language of falconry, which I had read in yellow manuscripts, the old forgotten French of the Middle Ages, was sounding in my ears while the hounds bayed and the hawks' bells tinkled, accompaniment to the stamping horses. She spoke again in the sweet, forgotten language. "If you would rather attach the long and leave thy haggard au bloc, Raoul, I shall say nothing, for it were a pity to spoil so fair a day's sport with an ill-trained soul. Estimer, abaisser, it's possibly the best way. Salut, donnera des reins." I was perhaps hasty with the bird. It takes time to pass à la frière and the exercises d'escape. Then the falconer Raoul bowed in his stirrups and replied, "If it be the pleasure of Mademoiselle, I shall keep the hawk." "It is my wish," she answered. "Falconry I know, but you have yet to give me a many lesson in autosser, my pas Raoul. C'est Peru, Louis, mount." The huntsman sprang into an archway, and in an instant returned, mounted upon a strong black horse, followed by Parker, also mounted. "Ah!" she cried joyously. "Speed, Glimeric Raina, speed, speed all. Sound thy horn, Ser Peru." The silvery music of the hunting horn filled the courtyard, and the hounds sprang through the gateway, and galloping hoofbeats lunged out of the paved court, loud on the drawbridge, suddenly muffled, then lost in the heather and bracken of the moors. Distant and more distant sounded the horn, until it became so faint that the sudden carol of a soaring lark drowned it in my ears. I heard the voice below responding to some call within the house. "I do not regret the chase. I will go another time. Courtesy to the stranger, Pelagie, remember?" And a feeble voice came quavering from within the house. Courtesy? I stripped and rubbed myself from head to foot in the huge earthen basin of icy water which stood upon the stone floor at the foot of my bed. Then I looked about for my clothes. They were gone, but on a settle near the door lay a heap of garments which I inspected with astonishment. As my clothes had vanished, I was compelled to attire myself in the costume which had evidently been placed there for me to wear while my own clothes dried. Everything was there: cap, shoes, and hunting doublet of silvery grey homespun, but the close-fitting costume and seamless shoes belonged to another century, and I remembered the strange costumes of the three falconers in the courtyard. I was sure that it was not the modern dress of any portion of France or Brittany, but not until I was dressed and stood before a mirror between the windows did I realise that I was clothed much more like a young huntsman of the Middle Ages than a Briton of that day. I hesitated and picked up the cap. Should I go down and present myself in that strange guise? There seemed to be no help for it. My own clothes were gone, and there was no bell in the ancient chamber to call a servant, so I contented myself with removing a short hawk's feather from the cap, and opening the door, went downstairs. By the fireplace in the large room at the foot of the stairs, an old Breton woman sat spinning with distaff. She looked up at me when I appeared, and, smiling frankly, wished me health in the Breton language, to which I laughingly replied in French. At the same moment my hostess appeared and returned my salutation with a grace and dignity that sent a thrill to my heart. Her lovely head, with its dark curly hair, was crowned with a headdress which set all doubts as to the epoch of my own costume at rest. Her slender figure was exquisitely set off in the homespun hunting gown edged with silver, and on her gauntlet-covered wrist she bore one of her petted hawks. With perfect simplicity, she took my hand and led me into the garden of the court, and seating herself before a table, invited me very sweetly to sit beside her. Then she asked me in her soft, quaint accent how I had passed the night, and whether I was very much inconvenienced by wearing the clothes which old Pelagie had put there for me while I slept. I looked at my own clothes and shoes, drying in the sun by the garden wall, and hated them. What horrors they were compared with the graceful costume which I now wore. I told her this laughing, but she agreed with me very seriously. "We will throw them away," she said in a quiet voice. In my astonishment, I attempted to explain that I not only could think of accepting clothes from anybody, although for all I knew it might be the custom of hospitality in that part of the country, but that I should cut an impossible figure if I returned to France clothed as I was then. She laughed and tossed her pretty head, saying something in old French which I did not understand, and then Pelagie trotted out with her tray on which stood 2 bowls of milk, a loaf of white bread, fruit, a platter of honeycomb, and a flagon of deep red wine. "You see, I have not yet broken my fast, because I wished you to eat with me, but I am very hungry," she smiled. "I would rather die than forget one word of what you have said," I blurted out while my cheeks burned. "She will think me mad," I added to myself, but she turned to me with sparkling eyes. "Ah," she murmured, "then Monsieur knows all that there is of chivalry." She crossed herself and broke bread. I sat and watched her white hands, not daring to raise my eyes to hers. "Will you not eat?" she asked. "Why do you look so troubled?" Ah, why? I knew it now. I knew I would give my life to touch my lips those rosy palms. I understood now that from the moment I looked into her dark eyes there on the moor last night I had loved her. My great and sudden passion held me speechless. "Are you ill at ease?" she asked again. Then, like a man who pronounces his own doom, I answered in a low voice. Yes, I am ill at ease for love of you." And as she did not stir nor answer, the same power moved my lips in spite of me and said, "I who am unworthy of the lightest of your thoughts, I who abuse hospitality and repay your gentle courtesy with bold presumption, I love you." She leaned her head upon her hands and answered softly, "I love you. Your words are very dear to me. I love you." Then I shall win you. Win me, she replied. But all the time I had been sitting silent, my face turned toward her. She, also silent, her sweet face resting on her upturned palm, sat facing me. And as her eyes looked into mine, I knew that neither she nor I had spoken human speech, but I knew that her soul had answered mine. And I drew myself up, feeling youth and joyous love coursing through every vein. She, with a bright colour in her lovely face, seemed as one awakened from a dream, and her eyes sought mine with a questioning glance which made me tremble with delight. We broke off fast, speaking of ourselves. I told her my name, and she told me hers, the Demoiselle Jean d'Is. She spoke of her father and mother's death, and how the 19 of her years had passed in the little fortified farm alone with her nurse Pelagie, Glamarac, Raina, the piqueur, and the 4 falconers, Raoul, Gaston, Hastur, and the Sir Pirou Louis, who had served her father. She had never been outside of the moorland, never had even seen a human soul before, except the falconers and Pelagie. She did not know how she had heard of Kerselec. Perhaps the falconers had spoken of it. She knew the legends of Loup Garou and Jeanne la Flamme from her nurse Pelagie. She embroidered and spun flax. Her hawks and hounds were her only distraction. When she had met me there on the moor, she had been so frightened that she almost dropped at the sound of my voice. She had, it was true, seen ships at sea from the cliffs, but as far as the eye could reach, the moors over which she galloped were destitute of any sign of human life. There was a legend which old Pelagie had told, how anybody once lost in the unexplored moorland might never return, because the moors were enchanted. She did not know whether it was true. She never had thought about it until she met me. She did not even know whether the falconers had even been outside, or whether they could go if they would. The books in the house which Pelagie, the nurse, had taught her to read were hundreds of years old. All this she told me with a sweet seriousness, seldom seen in anyone but children. My own name she found easy to pronounce, and insisted, because my first name was Philip, I must have French blood in me. She did not seem curious to learn anything about the outside world, and I thought perhaps she considered it had forfeited her interest and respect from the stories of her nurse. We were still sitting at the table, and she was throwing grapes to the small field birds which came fearlessly to our feet. I began to speak in a vague way of going, but she would not hear of it, and before I knew it, I had promised to stay a week and hunt with hawk and hound in their company. I also obtained permission to come again from Kerselec and visit her after my return. "Why?" she said innocently. "I do not know what I should do if you never came back." And I, knowing that I had no right to awaken her with the sudden shock which the avowal of my own love would bring to her, sat silent, hardly daring to breathe. "You will come often?" she asked. "Very often," I said. "Every day?" "Every day." "Oh," she sighed, "I am very happy. Come and see my hawks." She rose and took my hand again with a childlike innocence of possession, and we walked through the garden and fruit trees to a grassy lawn which was bordered by a brook. Over the lawn were scattered 15 or 20 stumps of trees, partially embedded in the grass, and upon all of these, except 2, sat falcons. They were attached to the stumps by thongs, which were in turn fastened with steel rivets to their legs just above the talons. A little stream of pure spring water flowered in a winding course within easy distance of each perch. The birds set up a clamour when the girl appeared, but she went from one to another, caressing some, taking others for an instant upon her wrist, or stooping to adjust their dresses. "Are they not pretty?" she said. See, here is a falcon genteel. We call it ignoble, because it takes the quarry in direct chase. This is a blue falcon. In falconry we call it noble, because it rises over the quarry, and wheeling, drops it upon from above. This white bird is a gerfalcon from the north. It is also noble. Here is a merlin, and this tercelet is a falcon heroner. I asked her how she had learned the old language of falconry. She did not remember, but thought her father must have taught it to her when she was very young. Then she led me away and showed me the young falcons still in the nest. They are termed naïs in falconry, she explained. A branchier is the young bird which is just able to leave the nest and hop from branch to branch. A young bird which has not yet molted is called a source, and a mûr is a hawk which has molted in captivity. When we catch a wild falcon which has changed its plumage, we term it a haggard. Raoul first taught me how to dress a falcon. Shall I teach you how it was done? She seated herself on the bank of the stream, among the falcons, and I threw myself at her feet to listen. Then the Demoiselle D held up one rosy-tipped finger and began very gravely. First one must catch the falcon. I am caught, I answered. She laughed very prettily, and told me my dressage would perhaps be difficult as I was noble. I am already tamed, I replied, dressed and belled. She laughed, delighted. Oh, my brave falcon, then you will return at my call? I am yours, I answered gravely. She sat silent for a moment. Then the colour heightened in her cheeks, and she held up her finger again, saying, Listen, I wish to speak of falconry. I listen, Countess Jeanne D. But again she fell into the reverie, and her eyes seemed fixed on something beyond the summer clouds. Philip, she said at last. Jean, I whispered. That is all I wished, she sighed. Philip and Jean. She held her hand toward me, and I touched it with my lips. Win me, she said, but this time it was the body and soul which spoke in unison. After a while, she began again. Let us speak of falconry. Begin, I replied. We have caught the falcon. Then Jean D took my hand in both of hers and told me with infinite patience the young falcon was taught to perch upon the wrist, how little by little it became used to the belled jesses and the chaperon cornet. They must first have a good appetite, she said. Then, little by little, I reduce their nourishment, which in falconry we call pas. When after many nights past a block, these birds are now, I prevail upon the haggard to stay quietly on the wrist. Then the bird is ready to be taught to come for its food. I fix the part to the end of a thong or leurre, and teach the bird to come to me as soon as I begin to whirl the cord in circles above my head. At first I drop the pot when the falcon comes, and he eats the food on the ground. After a little, he will learn to seize the lure in motion as I whirl it around my head or drag it over the ground. After this, it is easy to teach the falcon to strike at game, always remembering to faire courtiser à l'oiseau, that is, to allow the bird to taste the quarry. A squeal from one of the falcons interrupted her, and she arose to address the thong which had become whipped about the block, but the bird still flapped its wings and screamed. What is the matter? She said. Philip, can you see? I looked around at first and saw nothing to cause the commotion, which was now heightened by the screams and flapping of all the birds. Then my eye fell upon the flat rock beside the stream from which the girl had risen. A grey serpent was moving slowly across the surface of the boulder, and the eyes in its flat triangular head sparkled like jet. "A couleuvre," she said quietly. It's harmless, is it not?" I asked. She pointed to the black V-shaped figure on the neck. "It is certain death," she said. "It is a viper." We watched the reptile moving slowly over the smooth rock to where the sunlight fell in a broad, warm patch. I started forward to examine it, but she clung to my arm, crying, "Don't, Philip. I am afraid." "For me?" "For you, Philip. I love you." Then I took her in my arms and kissed her on the lips, but all I could say was, "Jean, Jean, Jean." And as she lay trembling on my breast, something struck my foot in the grass below, but I did not heed it. Then again something struck my ankle, and a sharp pain shot through me. I looked into the sweet face of Jean D and kissed her. With all my strength lifted her in my arms and flung her from me. Then, bending, I tore the viper from my ankle and set my heel upon its head. I remember feeling weak and numb. I remember falling to the ground. Through my slowly glazing eyes, I saw Jean's white face bending close to mine, and when the light in my eyes went out, I still felt her arms about my neck and her soft cheek against my drawn lips. When I opened my eyes, I looked around in terror. Jean was gone. I saw the stream and the flat rock. I saw the crushed viper in the grass beside me, but the hawks and boks had disappeared. I sprang to my feet. The garden, the fruit, the trees, the drawbridge, and the walled court were gone. I stared stupidly at a heap of crumbling ruins, ivy-covered and grey, through which great trees had pushed their way. I crept forward, dragging my numbed foot, and as I moved, a falcon sailed from the treetops among the ruins, and soaring, mounting in narrowing circles, faded and vanished in the clouds above. "Jean, Jean," I cried, but my voice died on my lips, and I fell on my knees among the weeds, and as God willed it, I not knowing had fallen kneeling before a crumbling shrine carved in stone for our Mother of Sorrows. I saw the sad face of the Virgin wrought in the cold stone. I saw the cross and thorns at her feet, and beneath it I read, "Pray for the soul of the Demoiselle Jean D, who died in her youth for love of Philip a stranger, A.D. 1573. But upon the icy slab lay a woman's glove, still warm and fragrant.